Here. There we go.
Okay, good. Welcome, everybody. I'm Richard Beckort. I'm the ag educator in Jackson. Talk a little bit about fruit tree basics. We're going to hit some high points, but again, if you have questions as you're going along, please ask them because I want to make sure I get the information to you that you need today. And my cohort in crime is Tom Springston down in Scott County, so he's going to be the question wrangler to start with, and try to keep me on track. So I'm going to try to share my screen.
And it's there, Richard. Looks good.
Okay, excellent. Just a few things on my screen here so I can see what I'm doing. And again, we're going to talk about fruit tree basics. I don't know whether you have trees that you're working with or whether you're going to thinking about getting them. You know, one thing about fruit trees as a general rule, it's not a short-term investment. It's going to be take time and patience to get fruit from those trees. You see that on the screen. It could take 6+ years for some of these fruit trees to bear a significant amount of fruit. The dwarf apple trees are pretty quick at that, but if you've got an old standard apple tree that you want, it's going to be 6 to 10 years or more. And the other ones are in that 3 to 5 year time frame that you're looking at. But again, once you make that investment, it's there for a while. You're going to be looking at this harvesting fruit off these trees for years to come if you take care of them. Fruit trees are not one of these things that you can plant out and expect to go out next summer and pick fruit and enjoy your apples and peaches and cherries or whatever they might be. And, it doesn't work that way. Fruit trees take a lot of care and maintenance. You have to think about everything that you're doing with a fruit tree think about it as 2 to 3 years down the road. What you're doing is going to benefit that tree down the road. You have to think about it. You're looking at this year's crop, but also you're protecting that tree from diseases, insects, pruning properly to improve the crop's years down 2 or 3 years down the road. So it's an ongoing thing, and it has a lot of responsibilities on it. There's a lot of pest problems, diseases, insects. Have to make sure you're doing things to protect the pollinators in your area, because if you don't have the pollinators, the bees, the wasps, those type of critters, you're not going to get the fruit set that you're going to be happy with. So making sure what you're doing as far as pesticide applications are protecting those pollinator populations in the area also. It's as simple as weed control, keeping the grass and weeds down around the plants. It's all season long of thinning fruit, things of that nature. And we'll go through some of this more, as we get into it. But as you're considering, planting new trees, let's put it from that perspective, it's going to be something that you really have to stop and think about what is the problem. What am I going to face? What areas am I putting this in that's, do these trees, am I putting them in the place in the yard that's the best suited for those trees? Some of the species, you're going to have more than one plant to get fruit because they're not self-fertile. They have to have cross-pollinators to, help. It takes a lot of space. Fruit trees take up space. They take up your time. Patience is a big thing. A lot of times over the years of working in extension, I get the call that I want to grow I want to grow apple trees because they're too expensive in the store. I'm going to want to grow them myself, because I want to know I want to grow them organically, or I just want to grow them myself so I don't have to buy them. Sometimes the best decision for that person to make is decide not to grow the fruit trees, theirself. But I'm all about, encouraging people to do it if that's what they want to do. But I just want to make sure people know what they're getting into. It's not a real quick, thing to jump into. Looking at apple trees, we're going to walk through the apples first as we go through. When you stop to think about it, there are over 6,000 named varieties of apple trees out there. There's a lot of different varieties. That's why when I get the call that says, I've just inherited grandpa's place and there's 3 apple trees, can you tell me what varieties they are? There might be an apple specialist somewhere who could get them close to the varieties, but it's going to be tough to tell you what variety those are. So when you're choosing apple trees, what I'm trying to get at is there's a lot of options out there. There's a lot of things that, a lot of varieties. Do you like a sweeter, tartar, firm, early season, late season? There's just a lot of varieties out there. One of the biggest issues with apple production right now is pollinators. We need to make sure that we keep those pollinators around, those insects, the bees, the wasps, the flies. There's a wide variety of things that pollinate apples, and we want to make sure that we're not applying certain pesticides, certain insecticides when those trees are in full bloom to help protect those. And maybe also, growing some other pollinators around for the rest of the growing season, so those insects will stick around and stay in the community, stay in the area. So there's other things for them to feed on besides just the apple blossoms in the spring. If we can get fruit set, but if it's kind of misshapen, one-sided, things like that, that's a good example of that pollination did not take place properly. Maybe it just didn't get pollinated completely because each one of those seeds inside that apple has to have a grain of pollen applied to that structure to get that germinate, to get that pollination to take place. So you can see here the slice of the apple half on the right-hand side, one seed has been pollinated, the other seed has not been pollinated. So I can't stress enough about the importance of keeping those pollinators around the area, keeping them active, keeping other things there blooming throughout the growing season to provide them food. Apples are a kind of a strange tree. They can get in this habit of what's called biennial bearing. If they have a very heavy fruit set one year, they might not even bloom much, if at all, the next season. So we want to do things to help protect, to get that tree in the cycle of blooming every year. So that's probably going to be some type of fruit thinning on those apple trees during the first part of the summer. That is either hand picking. Apple trees normally have what's called a June drop, that it will automatically, naturally drop fruit. It's hard to gauge how much that's going to be, but if you leave all that fruit on that tree and it's a very heavy fruit set, you're going to be disappointed at the end of the season because you're going to have a bunch of small fruit, not the nice size apples that you're looking for. So thinning them out, we want those apples spaced 4 to 6 inches apart. Basically, think about on a mature size apple, we don't want them to be touching, basically, as a good rule of thumb as you think that through. But so we need to either hand pick them off, mechanically pick them off. There are some chemical thinning methods. I do not recommend those for homeowners. If you're a commercial orchard and have some experience with them, yes, they will work. But again, trying to thin that fruit out is vitally important on fruit production. The other thing to think about apple trees is, a good old fashioned open pollinated, old variety, standard stock apple is a quite large tree. Most of the orchards now use semi-dwarf or completely dwarf apple trees. You see these in the picture here, and these are mature bearing fruit trees. They're not much over 6 or 7 feet tall. Couple reasons for that is, one is safety of picking. The crew can stand on the ground to pick. You don't have to be climbing up through the tree, and that smaller tree bears a lot of fruit, but you can also get more trees per area, per acre, per row, per yard than what you could large varieties of trees. So it's that rootstock. They are all grafted varieties pretty much. So you have the upper portion, the scion is grafted onto the rootstock. That rootstocking dwarfing capabilities are translocated up to the tree, so that rootstock keeps that tree from growing larger. But there's all different types of rootstocks out there. Some of the popular ones are B9 and M9 or M26. They are actually getting dwarfing cherry rootstocks available now, so that's even something that's in the market now. But on the screen here, you see just the orange tree on the right is the standard apple tree. These are not feet along the sides. These would be percentage of the standard size based on some of the rootstock. So you see that, some of those are fairly small trees. But they work, those small dwarf or semi-dwarf trees work well in backyards, in small areas. But again, that is what most of the orchards are using now. We always get the question, well, I want a bigger tree because it's going to produce more fruit. Not really. You're going to get close to the same amount of, you still get a lot of fruit off of a small tree. And why is that? Because that tree is only going to produce fruit where the sunshine hits it. It has to have that sunshine to produce that fruit, that quality of fruit you want. So if you take a standard tree that has a diameter across it of 16 feet, like the triangle on the left, you're only going to get fruit on that outside, 1.5 feet or 2 foot of the tree. It's not going to be bearing apples inside that tree. You look at what would be considered the dwarf tree on the right, you're still going to get a lot of production, but you lose out on that inner space of dead zone that's not producing fruit. Another real key with planting apple trees is the depth. As I said, most apple trees are grafted varieties. They're going to be, so they're going to have a rootstock on them. You're going to see a very physical spot there where that graft union takes place. We want to make sure that that graft union is held up out of the soil and out of the mulch that's around that trunk. What happens is, if that scion, that upper portion, the named variety portion of that apple tree gets down in contact with the soil, it can actually grow adventitious roots into the soil, and those roots take over controlling that upper scion portion of the plant. So you lose that dwarfing capability. I've been called out before to take a look at a tree that was supposed to be a dwarf tree, but it's just growing huge. Most of the time, it looks like, when you dig around, here's a picture of where that scion, that upper portion of the apple tree, has actually rooted. You see the bump there below that orangey colored bump. That's the graft union, and the rootstock is below that. So this apple tree was planted too deep, so you lose that dwarfing capability. There's more than just dwarfing capability of that rootstock. That rootstock also helps that tree produce a lot more fruit also. But if we go back a slide here, again, keep that graft union up above the soil level. Most of these trees, when you buy them, if you're buying them from a mail order catalog and they're young trees, are going to be bald and bare root. That means you're going to get them in a box with some sphagnum peat moss or something, burlap wrapped or paper wrapped around those roots. You want to get those trees planted as quick as you can, because we want to handle them while they're dormant. So make sure you're digging a hole wide enough that you can spread out what roots are there, so they're not crunched up in that hole. If these are container growing trees, and if you're buying them in a nursery, they might be container growing trees. You want to, as you take that container off, take a look at those roots. If they're encircling, if there's a large root mass on the outside of the root ball that was contained by that pot, you either want to take a good utility knife and make a few vertical cuts in there to encourage outer growth, or feather them out yourself. If it's just a really mass of roots, you might even just need to trim off the outer ½ inch or inch of that root ball. But make sure you get those roots laid out in that hole properly, so they have plenty of room to start taking off and growing into that native soil. Most of our fruit trees, apples here, peaches, pears, cherries, all want that neutral 6.5 to 7 soil pH. So if you haven't done a soil test lately, please, contact your local office. Most of us can give you information about how to get a soil test, where you can get it, and find out where you are. pH is especially important because it limits pH that's out of whack, high or low, either one, it doesn't matter, can limit the availability of nutrients in that soil. So, keep that in mind. If you haven't done a soil test lately, you need to really think about that. These are all very small trees. I mean, they're max out, if they're dwarf trees, going to be maxing out at 6 feet or so. They need support, and they need some fairly substantial support. You see some on the top row there, you see some different methods of individual iron rods by each tree fastened, and that trunk is fastened to the tree, to the stake. You can run heavy duty wire, like high tensile fence wire, and then around each tree there's structures that you can use to hold that tree upright. On the bottom, you see results of when trees are not staked properly. Again, they're fairly small tree. You put a lot of fruit production on that tree, a lot of weight, and it will, cause a lot of issues, So make sure you get them staked well. Okay, apple trees, pruning. That's always one of the questions we get a lot of. And at the end, I've got a short video we're going to try to give you play for you all. But ideally, we want that pyramid shape for apples, and I'll show you the difference between apples and peaches here in a couple slides. Wide bottom, narrow top. What we want that sunshine to be hitting all sides of that tree, all 365 degrees of that tree, because again, if they're not getting full sun, they're not going to produce what you want them to produce. Very good branch angles. If I can maybe. If you look at these branch angles here, that's what we're looking for, that really wide branch angle, is what we're looking for. The wider it is, the closer it is to 90 degrees angle, the stronger it's going to be. If those branches come straight up, they're going to be weakly attached and cause some problems. There's things that you can do to spread those widen that branch angle. You know, there are, on the top left, there are commercial branch spreaders you can buy from orchard supplies. Piece of broom handle, being the Southern Indiana boy that I am, an old tobacco stick cut with a nail on each end, push that branch down. Orchards actually make weights, a little Dixie cup, coffee cup full of cement with a wire on it. You wrap it loosely around the end of the branch, and that's just enough weight to pull that branch down on the young tree. This is stuff that we need to do while that tree's young, form that scaffold system to start with on that young 1 or 2, 3-year-old tree, because that will help that tree in the long run. But, you know, getting those branches to be 90-degree angles is one of the best things you can do for a young apple tree. This just shows you some cut through of the difference between a wide branch angle and a narrow branch angle. You see it gets a lot of buildup of bark is included in there. There's an example on the right where it broke off, and you see that triangle, dark triangle at the top of the break there. That's where that branch was not strongly attached to the trunk of the tree, and that causes it to break apart. If you're familiar with the landscape plant, Bradford pear, aristocrat pear, calorie pear, that is the major problem with those trees falling apart at, 15 years old or so. But when we start pruning an apple tree, we need to think about what type of cuts we're making. The top portion calls heading back cuts. Where you just cut the tip branches off of the end of the branches. What you're just causing to do, yes, you're keeping that tree smaller, but as you see, the right hand is the second year what growth you get. So you just cause a lot of side buds to break and put a lot of growth out. That's not what we want. We want to open that tree up. We want to get sunshine and air through that tree. Airflow helps disease problems. So most of the cuts that we do on pruning are not going to be heading back. They're going to be thinning, where you go back to the main branch or the main trunk and remove that whole branch. On the bottom one here, you remove this bottom branch. You see the difference in growth pattern. You don't get that big flush of growth like you do with the other, with the heading back cut. If I can get rid of my pointer, I can advance slides. Okay, so think about this as the main branch coming off, sticking out vertically, horizontally from the trunk. This is the way apple branches grow a lot. You have these, what we call drops, these branches on the bottom that you see hanging down here on the left and the upper right. Properly pruning, I had an old orchard guy said to me once when I was talking to him about pruning apple trees, he said, you want to make as few cuts as you can and make every cut count on pruning. So you come in here and it sounds bad, but you cut these bigger branches off that are the drops. On the right, the bottom, you see where those two cuts are made. You see the big difference in the way this branch looks. It's more open. These drops are down below everything. They're shaded. They're not going to produce fruit for you anyway, or the quality of fruit that you want. So you need to come in and cut these drops off. With two cuts, you've made a tremendous amount of difference in that tree structure, that branch. You've allowed air, you've gotten rid of branches that aren't going to produce. So that tree is only putting energy into branches, structures that you're going to get quality fruit from. You know, does anybody have any questions on some of the pruning? And we'll show the pruning video later that goes into a little bit more detail.
Richard, it wasn't a question on pruning, but it was on diseases. I told them I thought maybe you would be getting to that later.
We will get that right now. And if I don't answer your question,
okay,
let me know and we'll go into more detail then. But yeah.
The question was, what can you do for brown rot?
Okay, excellent. Very good question. And we'll try to get that covered here in the next slide or two. But disease problems is a real issue. Disease and insect control is a real problem with fruit production. Everybody wants that perfect teacher red apple to sit on the teacher's desk. That takes a lot of inputs to get to that. Fruit production, apples, peaches especially, are ones that you have to get on a spray schedule. It's not a one-time through the growing season and that will take care of it. It is multiple applications throughout the growing season. Just some things to think about. This is the time of year here now before bud break, sometime in that time period that we recommend using what's called a dormant oil spray. That's just a oil that's mixed with water. You spray the trunks, the branches. It takes care of some insect problems, a few disease problems, things of that nature. Then once bud breaks, that's when the sprays start. You need to be thinking about an insecticide and a fungicide. There are products called a multi-purpose fruit spray for homeowners that have both of those combined. One thing we recommend is not using an insecticide while those trees are blooming, because again, we're back to protecting that pollinator population. But there is a publication that I'll show later on that talks about managing pests in the home fruit planting. That's a Purdue publication. It has spray schedules for all the major fruits, trees, fruits, and brambles, strawberries, things of that nature. But most of those will have somewhere between anywhere from 5 to 10 plus applications a growing season. So we're talking having to keep those pesticides on that tree at all times, because with apple trees and peach trees and the like, it's easier to keep the problems out than control them once that borer or that canker disease gets into the plant. Especially with diseases like the brown rot, most of those are fungus diseases. The fungicides we use, most of them are preventative. So you have to keep that fungicide layer on that plant at all times to prevent that fungus organism from getting into that plant. So that's the type of thing that you want to make sure that you do very well at applying those pesticides. But that ID 146 publication, I'll have a picture of it later. But some of the same things apply to stone fruit, peaches, cherries, nectarines, whatever you might want to grow. Those just aren't growing as much around here. Most of those bloom fairly early in the spring and are damaged a lot with late frost or late freezes, are the main concerns with the peaches. Peaches especially are going to take a lot more aggressive spray. I feel like we'll take a more aggressive spray program than the apples. Apples, you might be able to get a crop with fewer applications than you do peaches, but peaches are pretty tough to grow, and it's just my experience over the years. And also they are relatively short lifespan trees. One of the big differences between apples and peach production is the way you prune. If you can remember the apple, we kind of wanted that pyramid shape, base wider than the top. Peaches, we want kind of an open vase. We want major branches that come out. We want that center open to get sunshine and air down through that plant. The other major difference is apples grow on new wood. Peaches grow on 1, 2, 3-year-old wood. So there's a difference in pruning. I feel pretty comfortable about pruning apple trees. Peaches is a different beast. You just have to, it's not hard, it's just different than pruning an apple tree. If you have peaches and apple trees in your yard and they both look alike, you're probably pruning one of them incorrectly. Again, we need to thin that fruit if we want the nice size peaches. You know, if you keep every peach on there that sets on a good year, you're going to end up with very small, you know, not desirable peaches on there. They will start bearing fruit quicker than an apple tree, but they also don't live as long as an apple tree. Here's the publication I've talked about, and maybe before we're done, we can put the link to that publication in the chat box, you know, the ID 146. Excellent publication that tells you what sprays need to be made when for those disease and insect control. But brown rot is going to be one of those major ones that, you know, getting good fungicide coverage is going to be what takes care of that. And maybe even alternating a couple different fungicides throughout the growing season will help. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen at the moment. Does anybody have any questions before I start trying to do the pruning video?
Richard, great work. I just tossed that link for ID 146 into the chat, so everyone
Okay.
can click on that. And I can tell you I concur with Richard. That is about the most useful guide for homeowners working on fruit production that we have available.
Excellent. Thanks, John.
Yeah, he was faster typer than I am.
I was working to beat you to the punch, Tom. I knew we were in a race there.
Yeah.
It's a contest.
Yeah. But I didn't see any other questions in the chat right now, Richard.
Okay, I'm going to try to show the video here. Oh, wait a minute. Let me probably have to get out of my PowerPoint. Okay, now it's up. Let me see if I can. And hopefully this technology works and the sound works. If not, we can give you the link to it. But this is a video out of Maine extension that just does a very good job of talking about pruning apple trees. Take her timing with a grain of salt because she's doing this in April and the tree is still dormant. So hopefully your apple trees by April are showing some signs of life. Do you see and hear the video?
Yes, it's coming up.
Hello, my name is Renee Moran, and I'm a tree fruit specialist at the University of Maine. We're here at the Agricultural Experiment Station in Monmouth, and we call it the Highmore Farm. Today we're going to have a demonstration on pruning apple trees. It is the dormant season, the best time of the year to do the majority of pruning for our fruit trees. You want to prune your fruit trees between January and before growth starts in spring. And we're in the month of April right now, which is an ideal time for pruning because a lot of the snow is gone, but growth has not yet started. Before pruning, it's important to know why you're pruning your fruit trees. There are several reasons for pruning fruit trees that are part of a hobby orchard. Today, we're going to prune this fruit tree to improve fruit production. But some people have apple trees that are part of a landscape. And in that case, you would prune fruit trees for aesthetic reasons because of the shape of the tree and because of the flowers of the tree. But this tree will prune for improved fruit production. And to do that, we're going to prune it so that it gets the most amount of sunlight throughout the tree canopy. The tree behind me has already been pruned. When we pruned this tree, the first thing we did was to select which limbs to keep and then to prune the rest of the tree so that each limb gets the most amount of sunlight as possible without over pruning the tree. This tree has a typical shape for a semi-dwarf apple tree. It's a cone-shaped tree where the lower limbs are the longest limbs on the tree and the upper limbs are shorter than the tree. And there's only one main trunk or leader to the tree. This type of training gets the most amount of sunlight throughout the entire tree canopy. And you'll notice that the lower limbs don't have other limbs growing right on top of them. Those were pruned out or were not allowed to grow. And the upper limbs have been shortened so that they're not growing down and into the lower limbs. And the tree is pruned back in the top to be a certain height. The height would be a personal preference, usually based on how tall your ladder is or how high you're willing to reach into the tree. You'll also notice that the limbs have been pruned so that things growing underneath or growing in a downward fashion have been pruned off, and shoots that are growing straight up are no longer in this tree. This vertical or downward growing orientation cuts out a lot of sunlight, and these types of branches don't produce the best fruit, so they get pruned out. And then at some point, you have to know when to stop pruning to prevent yourself from over pruning the tree. You don't want to prune out any more than 1/3 of the total tree canopy. To make a thinning cut, you would remove the shoot or limb at its base where it joins the previous growth, like this. When you're making a thinning cut, it's best to prune back as much of it as possible into the crown or the ring of circles surrounding the base of that shoot. And this prevents the regrowth of water sprouts. The smaller the stump you leave, the fewer water sprouts you should have next year. And pruning back into the crown or the collar of the branch helps the pruning cut to heal. The other type of pruning cut is a heading cut. And in this case, you're pruning into the growth, leaving behind part of that shoot. And this would be a 1-year-old shoot. A heading cut into that would be like that. And when you remove the tip of that shoot, it releases these buds from growth inhibition, and you get a bushy type of regrowth following the following season. We rarely make this type of pruning cut when we're pruning fruit trees. So in this case, I'm going to head it back into the 2-year-old section like that. But a more severe type of heading cut would be to be pruning into this section of the limb. And we already have branches that have developed. So when by making a heading cut into this part of the branch, we're not likely to stimulate the growth of new shoots. And so we don't get a profusion to follow. And this type of pruning cut is very useful for making the branches shorter, where you have trees growing into each other. A heading cut into the older sections of the branch will make it shorter. And it's also useful in the top part of the tree to bring the height down. It's also important to pay attention to how many flower buds are on the apple tree when you're pruning it, to prevent yourself from pruning out too many. Flower buds on an apple tree have a characteristic shape that is very different from leaf buds. Flower buds are found at the tips of short shoots and spurs. Spurs are just shoots that grew a few inches or less in one season. Flower buds are fat in contrast to leaf buds, which are much smaller and shorter or more pointed. Laterally along the shoots and spurs, apples normally form leaf buds. In rare instances, they'll form flower buds. So pay attention to how many flower buds the tree has. If it has a lot of flower buds in this year, it's okay to prune off a number of these shoots that have flower buds. We've reached a point where the tree is nearly finished pruning, especially on this side. There's still a lot of shoots on that side that can be pruned out. If you like to have a lot of flowers on your fruit trees, then this would be a great place to stop pruning it. But if you're pruning it to get the best colored, largest fruit, this tree could still use more pruning.
Okay. Again, today we're just giving you the high points of fruit production, home fruit production. It's a great hobby. It's a great thing to do. Just know going in that you need some patience because it's going to take a number of years, and it's something that you just can't work on for 2 or 3 days out of the year and expect to get, good production off those trees. Anybody have any questions or anything that we did not cover that we need to cover in a little bit more detail?
I don't see any questions, Richard, but in the chat, I did post the link to that University of Maine. There's also a publication that was involved where the video was embedded in that link too. So that's
Okay.
in the chat if somebody'd like to copy that. Richard, I don't recall you saying it, or nobody asked, or it wasn't covered in the video, but quite often I'll get folks asking about, after I prune, should I do something to treat, that pruning cut?
Good question, Tom. And no, a properly made pruning cut, nice sharp loppers or pruners made into that branch collar area and didn't rip or tear, will heal up very quickly. That tree just compartmentalizes that damage. And we do not need to use wound paint, black paint, white paint, whatever you happen to have. That tree will heal up itself just fine. Good question though, Tom.
Richard, one that comes to mind for me, I helped my sister-in-law plant a tree last year, and you had mentioned how compacted that root ball can be in a container. So I did exactly what's mentioned, that you mentioned, as far as I took a little saw and cut off a little bit of those compacted roots to allow for that lateral growth. With that in mind, what's your perspective, burlap wrapped, bare root, or pre-packaged? Are they all essentially equal, or would you prefer one over the other?
Any of them. Bare root I like because it's typically usually cheaper, and I don't like to spend a whole lot of money. So bare root works well. They are all excellent if you handle them properly. Bare root, again, you need to get that in the ground just as soon as possible while it's still dormant. Container growing, container and burlap, as long as they've been handled well on the sales lot, the nursery lot, when you get them, if they've kept that root ball either in the container or balled in burlap, moist, do quite well. Again, when you take the pot off the containerized, take a look at that root system. If you need to break it apart, trim some off, make some cuts to encourage roots to come out, excellent. Balled and burlap, you're paying a premium typically for that field growing tree. You're paying a premium for that root soil contact undisturbed. You want to get it down in the hole. Always move it by the root ball, not by the trunk. Once you get it there, my advice is, once you get it in situated where you want it, remove as much of the burlap off as you can. Especially don't have it up through the soil surface, but they all work. One that I've seen a lot of in garden centers, big box stores, places that bring in garden stuff in the spring, the pre-package, in the plastic bags. Keep in mind that most of those are balled or bare root plants. They have a little bit of usually sawdust or peat moss around them and put it in a plastic bag. We need to keep that in mind and handle those as bare root and get them down in the ground as soon as possible. If they've leafed out, bloomed on the sales lot in that little plastic bag, just keep in mind that they're weakened already, and you're going to have to really do something to get them to thrive and grow real well, because a lot of those are bare root in those plastic bags that you see early spring. Good point though, John.
Thank you, Richard.
Any other questions or comments? I've put in the chat box my email address. If you think of something, or if something I didn't cover enough, shoot me an email and I'll be glad to answer that for you.
Richard, thank you. Okay. This is obviously a series, and we really appreciate everyone turning out today. Richard probably mentioned this. We're going to have a recording as well. So if you want to go back and reference this, or maybe share with friends and family, we'd really appreciate that. You should have received an email from me on Monday. You'll get another one from me in about 10 days reminding you about our next topic. So we're just thrilled that you joined us, and I'll leave it to the rest of my team. Any other comments before we conclude here?
I just want to say thanks to John and Kyle, because they're the driving force behind this series. They're the ones who, are getting it put together and doing the behind the scenes technical stuff, which some of us really appreciate someone else doing. So yeah.
I'll just ditto that as well. And John, I'm not sure when you sent that link out, if it's like it goes to everyone that registered for all the series, but the one that will be in 2 weeks is on spring lawn tips. So on February the 10th, this 11:30 to 12:30 time period. So maybe if that's not one you specifically signed up for, but had second thoughts of, hey, yeah, that's pretty timely too, then let John know, so you'll be sure and get the link to this webinar then again.
And again, I would just encourage you, if you have fruit trees or think about fruit trees, getting that ID 46, Managing Pests in the Home Fruit Plantings, gives you a lot of basic good tree care information in there. If not, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, Richard, thank you again, everyone. Have a great day, and reach out to any of us if you have questions.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. And John, will you stop the recording then, or?